Would you believe that every year thousands of young men in Gambia become the victims of sex tourism? It may sound like a plot from a dark dystopian novel, but unfortunately it's a grim reality. In the bustling markets and along the idyllic beaches of Gambia, an unseen scourge is taking its toll. Sex tourism, the practice of people traveling to engage in sexual activity with locals, often in exchange for money or gifts, has planted its roots deep in this tiny West African nation. The victims, countless young men barely out of their teens, exploited by older, wealthier women from abroad. The statistics are staggering. Every year, an estimated several thousands of these young men find themselves caught in this web of exploitation. They're lured by promises of a better life, of financial stability, of a way out of the crippling poverty that plagues much of Gambia. But the reality is far from the dream they're sold. The financial implications of this trade are equally shocking. It's a clandestine industry that's worth millions, perhaps even billions of dollars worldwide. And yet those at the heart of it, the young men who serve as the lifeblood of this trade, see only a fraction of that wealth. The rest lines the pockets of those who exploit them, leaving them trapped in a cycle of dependency and abuse. But numbers alone can't convey the full extent of the damage. The psychological and emotional impact on these young men is profound. Stripped of their dignity and freedom, they're left to grapple with feelings of shame, guilt, and worthlessness. It's a silent epidemic, one that's largely ignored by the international community. This is a reality that too many young men face in Gambia, and it's a reality we need to confront. It's time to shed light on this unseen scourge, to expose the dark underbelly of sex tourism in Gambia, because only by acknowledging the problem can we begin to find a solution. Now, hear directly from some of these men who have bravely agreed to share their stories. First, we meet Lamin, a young man barely out of his teens. He tells us of the desperation that led him to the beaches of Gambia, where he was lured into the world of sex tourism by the promise of a better life. Instead, he found himself trapped in a cycle of exploitation, treated as nothing more than a commodity by the older white women who frequented the area. Then there's Buba, who speaks of the shame he feels, a shame that permeates every corner of his life. He was once a promising student, dreaming of becoming a doctor. Now he is a shadow of his former self, his dreams replaced by the harsh realities of his circumstances. The money he earns, he says, is tainted, a constant reminder of the choices he's been forced to make. Next, we hear from Musa, who describes the psychological toll of the industry. He talks about the nights he spends awake, haunted by the faces of the women who have used him, and the days he spends trying to forget. He tells us about the loneliness, the isolation, and the fear that are his constant companions in this dark reality. Finally, Samba shares his story. He was just 17 when he was first approached by a tourist looking for a holiday romance. He speaks of the confusion he felt, of the manipulation and the deceit, and the moment he realized he was no longer in control of his own life. Their voices echo in the silence, their words a stark testament to the grim reality of Gambia's sex tourism industry. These are not just victims, they are human beings, each with their own hopes and dreams, each forced into a life they did not choose. Their stories are a chilling reminder of the human cost of sex tourism. But why is this happening? To answer that, we've spoken to experts in the field. Gambia's sex tourism issue is a complex web of socioeconomic factors and psychological implications. Sociologists point to the country's high poverty rates and low employment opportunities, particularly for young men. They argue that these young men are driven into the arms of older, wealthier white women by a desperate need for financial stability. On the other hand, psychologists bring attention to the emotional toll this takes on the victims. These young men, often just boys, are forced into a maturity far beyond their years, subjected to emotional and sometimes physical abuse. The psychological trauma experienced is profound, leading to issues like depression, anxiety, and a distorted perception of relationships and self-worth. Human rights activists, however, focus on the broader societal impact. They warn that this form of exploitation undermines the fabric of Gambian society. It normalizes relationships built on power imbalances and financial transactions rather than mutual respect and love. This could have long-term implications on how relationships are perceived and formed in the country. Moreover, there's a ripple effect on the victims' families and communities. Parents live in constant fear for their children, while communities are torn apart by the shame and stigma attached to these relationships. The erosion of social cohesion is a grave concern, as it could lead to further societal breakdown. But perhaps the most alarming aspect is the normalization of this exploitation. This acceptance perpetuates a vicious cycle where young men see no other viable option but to submit to this form of modern-day slavery. It's a heartbreaking reality that needs to be addressed urgently. The experts unanimously agree. Tackling this issue requires a multi-pronged approach, addressing not just the immediate problem but also the underlying socio-economic factors and psychological impacts. It's a monumental task, but one that cannot be ignored any longer. As we can see, the roots of this problem run deep and the impacts are devastating. So what is being done to tackle this issue? Let's examine the government's response. The Gambian government has been grappling with the issue of sex tourism for years. The problem is deeply entrenched and the solutions are far from straightforward. The government's approach has been two-pronged: legislation and awareness campaigns. On the legislative front, the Gambian government has enacted laws aimed at punishing those who exploit young men in the sex trade. The Sexual Offences Act of 2021, for instance, criminalizes the exploitation of anyone for sex, with penalties that range from hefty fines to imprisonment. However, despite these laws, enforcement has proven to be a challenge. The justice system is often slow, and many cases go unreported due to the stigma attached to being a victim of sexual exploitation. In terms of awareness, the government has launched campaigns to educate the public about the dangers of sex tourism. These campaigns aim to change societal attitudes and encourage victims to come forward. But again, the effectiveness of these initiatives is questionable. The deep-seated socio-economic issues that drive young men into the arms of sex tourists are not easily addressed through awareness campaigns alone. Furthermore, the government has been criticized for its lack of comprehensive support services for victims. While there are some organizations that provide assistance, they are often underfunded and overwhelmed. Without adequate support, many victims find themselves trapped in a cycle of exploitation. The government's response thus far has been a patchwork of initiatives that, while well-intentioned, have struggled to make a significant impact. The scale and complexity of the issue demand a more robust and holistic approach. Perhaps what is needed is not only stricter enforcement of existing laws, but also a concerted effort to address the root causes of the problem, such as poverty and lack of education. Clearly, there is a need for more action and better policies. Gambia is not alone in this fight. Here's how the international community is responding. Across the globe, the issue of sex tourism is being met with growing concern and action. Various international bodies, governments, and non-governmental organizations are taking active steps to combat this worldwide menace. At the forefront, we have the United Nations, which has been instrumental in setting global standards against human trafficking and sexual exploitation. Under the UN's Palermo Protocol, countries are encouraged to adopt comprehensive measures to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking, especially women and children. In the European Union, the bloc has implemented stringent laws to combat sex tourism, making it a crime for any EU citizen to engage in sexual exploitation of children, even if the act is committed abroad. This is known as extraterritorial legislation. Simultaneously, in North America, both the United States and Canada have enacted laws to prosecute their citizens who travel abroad to engage in illicit sexual conduct with minors. The United States, for instance, has the PROTECT Act, which allows the prosecution of those engaging in sex tourism, regardless of where it occurs. And it's not just the government stepping up. Non-governmental organizations worldwide are making significant strides. ECPAT International, for instance, is a global network of organizations working to end child sexual exploitation. They work tirelessly, providing support to victims, raising awareness, and advocating for stronger legislation. Similarly, organizations like the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women are working on a global scale to promote women's rights and combat sexual exploitation. The importance of these collective global efforts cannot be overstated. It's a testament to the fact that when we stand together, we can make a difference. It's a fight that transcends borders, cultures, and social structures. Yet, while we celebrate these efforts and the progress made, we must also acknowledge that there's still a long journey ahead. It's a fight that demands constant vigilance, persistent efforts, and unwavering commitment. While these efforts are a step in the right direction, there's still much work to be done. So, what can we do to help end sex tourism in Gambia and around the world? One crucial step is supporting victims. This support can come in various forms: financial aid, psychological assistance, or even providing a safe haven. Many organizations are working tirelessly to rescue, rehabilitate, and reintegrate victims back into society. By donating to these organizations, you're not just contributing funds, you're offering hope and a chance at a new life. Another vital element in combating this issue is advocating for stronger laws and stricter enforcement. It's not enough to merely condemn these acts. We need to push for legislation that penalizes and deters sex tourism. This means lobbying for harsher sentences for offenders and tighter controls on travel to known sex tourism destinations. Moreover, we must also demand accountability from governments. They have a responsibility to protect their citizens, especially the most vulnerable. This includes ensuring that law enforcement agencies have the resources and training necessary to tackle this issue effectively. But we can't rely solely on governments and organizations. As individuals, we play a crucial role. Spreading awareness is a powerful tool. By educating ourselves and others about the realities of sex tourism, we can help break down the stigma and silence that often surrounds this issue. We can use our platforms, whether it's social media, blogs, or simply word of mouth, to share stories, facts, and information. Finally, consider supporting organizations that are on the front lines fighting sex tourism. These groups are doing incredible work, often under challenging conditions. Your support can help them continue their mission, whether it's through donations, volunteering, or simply sharing their work with your network. Remember, change doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow, often frustrating process, but with each step we take, we're moving closer to a world where sex tourism is a thing of the past. Every one of us has a part to play in ending this exploitation. The fight against sex tourism in Gambia is far from over, and your support is critical. We urge you to lend your voice to this cause, because every echo counts in the fight against this unseen scourge. Share this video with your friends, your family, your community. Ignite conversations about this dark reality, because awareness is the first step towards change. Educate yourself and others about the complexities of sex tourism. Understanding the issue is key to dismantling the structures that allow it to persist. There are a multitude of resources out there waiting to be explored. And finally, consider supporting organizations that are on the front lines of this battle. Your donations, your time, your advocacy, they all make a difference. These organizations are working tirelessly to combat sex tourism and empower the young men of Gambia. Together, we can shine a light on this dark reality and make a real difference in the lives of those affected by sex tourism in Gambia.